Today's Organic Grower Summit 2020 Roundtable is sponsored by BioFlora, IFCO, International Paper, NatureSafe, and Semios. Leading the discussion is Dave Puglia, President and CEO of Western Growers Association.
Well, welcome everybody. Glad you could join us virtually for the Organic Grower Summit virtual discussion today. Hopefully and expect we're going to have a lively discussion given the panelists that we have. Let me introduce them one by one. First, to my right, Vic Smith, President of JV Smith Companies. Vic has operations in California, Arizona, Colorado, and Mexico. Across from me directly is Bruce Taylor, who's President of Taylor Farms and Earthbound Farm. Bruce has operations throughout the U.S. and elsewhere in the globe as well. And to my left is Soren Bjorn, President of Driscoll's North America. So obviously we want to spend some time today talking about the organic sector, and there is crossover between conventional and organic when we talk about different issues. And so I think it'd be helpful to kind of set the table with a quick look back at 2020, as it's almost in the books, can't happen soon enough. We want to get to 2021. So again, this isn't necessarily strictly an organic assessment, but give me your thoughts on how 2020 affected the industry and how you start to look ahead at 2021 for a different outcome, or how you may have adapted during the course of this year in ways that wouldn't be expected. Vic, maybe we'll start with you.
Interesting year, in all respects. Started out okay, but after the first quarter, boom. Anyway, I look at it and say, okay, the produce industry, and particularly our sector that we focus in, primarily leafy greens, extreme anxiety the first 30 to 60 days for us. After that, it seemed to settle down, and we found a level where consumption, it appeared consumption was going to level out. Obviously, the standard thing was it shifted from food service over to more retail, and we were able to shift gears in a lot of different ways with a lot of different companies we work with. And so we found a smoothing out there, and then it was all the challenges dealing, and I think we'll probably get into that later, but in labor, getting labor available, taking care of our laborers, making sure that they're not going to be infected. And so I think, we're in a place right now that we had a meeting yesterday. We spent an hour and a half analyzing what our sales requirements are going to be for the next year. And we got up and walked away after an hour and a half and knew less than when we started. That's where I'm at.
So it's business as usual at Smith Farms. All right. Sounds about right. Bruce, how do you look back on the year?
Dave, I'd say the year for us is kind of a tale of two cities. We market to three different segments: the retail segment, the food service segment, and the deli segment. And obviously the food service segment went to zero the first couple weeks of the pandemic. Deli segment took its time. It wasn't quite as smart. It took longer to go to zero, but then it went to zero as well because people realized they could make their own sandwiches at home, make their own meals at home, make their own salads at home. And so as we progressed through the summer, those segments started to come back, but they're still experiencing an incredible amount of pain. The restaurant segment, the food service distribution segment, many of them have been wiped out. And so I'm curious to see, we'll talk about that kind of looking forward, what that's going to mean for the industry going forward. From our perspective, because we supply the three different segments, you think that, gosh, it was pretty easy sailing. But what happens is that different segments, it turned out, I hadn't paid attention to it, consume different types of vegetables. So the food service segment, the quick service restaurants consume quite a bit of iceberg lettuce. They don't consume organic spinach or organic spring mix. And so the demand pattern shifted. And so here we've got 10, 12 weeks of supply out there in the field. And we're going, oh, what the heck? What do we do now with all this product? And so we had about a $70 million pile of vegetables out there to work through in a 10-week period of time. And our team did a nice job doing it, but that was a huge challenge. And so even today, the challenge is, what do I plant, right? When's COVID when's the vaccine to be available? When are people going to actually take the vaccine? And then when will demand start to pick up in some of these base channels. So
does it have the on-again, off-again closures of restaurants, indoor or outdoor only, and now outdoor is going to be locked down again in Los Angeles County? So how does that affect your supply chain?
Very much is slowing again. So the summer we saw an uptick. We got to about 80% of normal in the food service category. And then now we're seeing slowing again. You always see slowing around Thanksgiving anyway, but we're seeing slowing again. Conversely, on the retail side, we've seen a significant uptick in demand. And so our sales guys tell me that they're geniuses, and I tell them, no, you're just lucky. But we've seen that uptick in demand, and so that's been healthy to offset the drop in food service in deli.
There's only one genius at Taylor Farms, right?
We haven't found him yet. We are still looking.
Soren, looking back at 2020.
Yeah, I mean, a lot like Vic and Bruce. Okay, initially it was pretty worrisome. You know, we were throwing berries away in April. But by the time we got into the summer, it's been really, really strong, you know, and so it'd be quite a good year for us. And that's not how we called it back in April and May. And unlike on the vegetable side, you know, in the berries, you know, we make the planting decisions a lot further ahead of time. So we were making our plant orders for next year back in April. And so we were not very aggressive back in April in our thinking. And that's probably going to come back to haunt us a little bit in 2021. We wish probably we were a little bit more aggressive with our growth plans. So, but this will turn out to be a good year because we're mostly in retail, and particular products like strawberries, which you know is in most households, have done really, really well in 2020. So,
yeah, explain how your planting cycle works.
Yeah, I mean, a typical you know strawberry planting, let's say here in California, would be is you sort of place the order for the plants in March or April. You actually then plant the nursery in California, and then you harvest that nursery in the fall, you know, late September, October, November, and then you plant the strawberry plants right away, and then they sort of sit over the winter, let's say here in Watsonville, Salinas, and we start harvesting in March. So if you were here today, you would say, let's go for some more acres next year, but we really had to make that decision in April. And there's, you know, there are only the number of plants we planted in the nursery, that's it. You know, and so there's really nothing we can do to increase the supply for next year. Ideally, we would have, but that should make for, I suspect, pretty good markets in 2021.
Yeah, this is why farming is the highest requirement of risk tolerance probably of any industry in the world, right? Vic mentioned this, and I want to get to it perhaps pretty quickly, which is the workforce and protecting the workforce as the virus moved around different communities. And all of you had to respond very, very quickly, in some ways guessing, because there just wasn't that much known early on about the nature of this virus. So tell me a little bit about how that has transpired, how well you've succeeded, where you would like to do things differently to protect the workforce. Did you have enough labor going through 2020?
Well, and you know, you can talk about the beginning of the pandemic, as it smoothed out, and then as we're progressing through. And you know, regulations tend to follow slowly afterwards because nobody knew the full extent of it. What happened to us, we were operating heavily in Mexico in the spring, and then here in Salinas Valley in the summer, and in Colorado midsummer. So we were struck with the biggest problems in the beginning, just trying to figure out what are the best tactics to use. And with little knowledge, so in a lot of areas we overreacted, and so we cut back a plant that we ship year-round green onions out of, and we cut it back to 20% capacity. We just didn't have any idea. We just did a lot of separation and did what we could. Then the Mexican government came in and said, this is what you will do, which actually increased us by another, you know, we got up to 50% because we had a larger plant, we were able to do it. The biggest problem that we faced, I would say in the first 90 days, was the total confusion factor that got exasperated because the people that were working for us didn't know we promised to pay everybody. We said, look, if you're not there, we're going to pay you. You know, it's not your fault this happened, we're going to bear the burden. But we really had to get out and communicate very effectively with them. And so we had a good communication channel throughout our systems there. And we talked to people and explained to them, this is what we're doing, and we're going to follow these things, and we're also got kind of a hotline thing set up for best practices and and improving things week to week. But we had to get that communicated to our employees because they weren't ready to come back to work. And technically, and they didn't know for sure, but are we risking our lives to go back to work? So it was that fear, panic type factor we had to deal with. And as we went through it, we really strived to go above and beyond to try, not because, I'd like to say we're good guys, and I'm sure these two gentlemen are, but, we look at it and I say, we had to show and prove to our employees we're going to go way above and beyond to protect you. And that was the thing we had to get over.
And Soren, in your case, you work with so many independent growers, and so I'm curious how you managed the confusion, as Vic put it at the outset, trying to protect workers without really knowing what the right protocols were and the workers being confused themselves. So through independent growers, how did you manage all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just went back and looked at it. We made about 30 different operational changes in our own operations or in the grow operations, some very specific recommendations. I think now in retrospect, we were quite a bit ahead of a lot of local and state regulators. I think our mask mandate went in place the second week in March, when a lot of people were still debating whether we should wear masks or not. Mandatory temperature checks went in sometime in April, okay, and that got debated way into the summer whether that really made any sense. And I think we just tried to do what we felt was common sense, right? We couldn't wait for everybody to get their story together. And I think one of the big challenges, like just sitting right here in Monterey County, and we literally have ranches that's straddling two different counties that have two different sets of guidelines, right? Only just 2 weeks ago, Santa Cruz County was, one color, and Monterey County was a different color, right? But you can't operate with two different sets of guidelines. And so I feel like we went a little bit over and above what probably was expected. That turned out to serve us well in the long run. I can tell you that was not without a lot of debates. Okay, not everybody was in agreement. Okay, when we first came out and said, this is what we're gonna go and do. But we felt like overreacting was probably better, and then we can reel it a little bit back, as opposed to always being behind. And that was sort of the attitude we took, and I think that has, for the most part, served us pretty well.
Bruce?
I guess to comment on your point, I guess the good thing about running a dictatorship is you don't get a lot of pushback. So we were very aggressive from the get-go with mass temperature checks on the way in. We run 16 plants around the country and 2 in Mexico. And so we've got 22,000 people we've got to take care of. And we know that if they don't feel comfortable coming to work, we can't make product for our customers. And so we were very aggressive with it. We manufacture our own plastic clamshells for our organic program in Earthbound in San Juan Bautista. We started manufacturing face shields for our people and distributing the face shields to our people as well. So I feel our team did a really nice job. Even that being said, we have over 900 illnesses around the country, around the 16 plants. And so we kind of research each one. Obviously, we've got full pay for people that are sick, full pay for people that go home for 2 weeks because they had contact with someone that was sick. And we do the research to find out where they got sick. And it turns out 95% of them got sick in the community somewhere. They didn't get sick at work because their coworkers didn't get sick. And so there's continuing to be obviously a huge risk of community spread. And that creates fear among the workforce, fear among the community. And so we need to be really aggressive and, I don't like to use the word transparent, but transparent to let people know what we're doing so they feel comfortable, so the community feels comfortable and embraces our operations.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think what we've learned this year is that the virus is going to do what the virus is going to do. There is no protected community of people. No matter how well we respond, we've seen plenty of frontline healthcare workers become infected in spite of all the best precautions.
The more we learn is it's incredibly contagious.
Right.
You don't realize that until it's too late, but it's incredibly contagious.
Right. So we're on the cusp now of a vaccines, plural, coming, which I think affords us the opportunity to look at 2021 at least, and certainly 2022 and beyond with some more positive feelings, right? So Give me
and we think organic field workers and organic plant workers are essential workers that should be first in line to get the vaccine. So
right on, right on.
any help anybody can provide would be fantastic.
As your advocate, I take due note of that.
Absolutely.
So let's look ahead now to the organic industry's place in the produce industry in 2021 and beyond. You all have been leaders in the industry in organic production and marketing for such a long time. I'm curious what you all think of the evolution of the organic industry. If you think back to its beginnings, it's a very different look today, probably for most people, than was envisioned maybe at the outset. So share your thoughts if you would.
Well, you mentioned, excuse me, last year and a half ago we bought Earthbound Farm, and they were one of the original significant organic salad producers. And they kind of ran into the trouble of even years ago, this is 10, 15 years ago, that they were perceived as too big. Because organic was more of a niche, it was kind of the mom and pop kind of thing, and they were perceived as too big, almost violating the norm of organic. And what people miss is that what they were able to do is, my friend Todd Coons, who I think actually created Spring Mix, when I first met Todd 26 years ago, he was selling a 3-pound box of Spring Mix for $18 a box. And he could barely make money doing that, right? It's now $3.50 a box. And so think about the availability to the average American now for organic food. And it takes large-scale agriculture, in many cases, to create those economies that can then reduce the price and increase the availability to people across the country. So that's kind of both sides of the coin there.
The yin and the yang.
That's right, in the organic world.
Sorry, what do you think?
Well, I think the consumers are really clear. They want this as part of a healthier lifestyle. This is how they see it, right? They want organic to be part of a healthy lifestyle. And in the berries, it's growing way faster than conventional, probably 3 or 4 times faster. And so I think we are sort of, a little bit at a crossroads, okay, and I think this includes politically, is organic something that's, has to be this pure thing that runs the risk that it's actually quite elitist and is only available to those that can afford it, which is not the way it used to be back in the day when spring was $18.50 a box, right? Or is this something that's widely available to almost anybody? And I think if you don't have the larger companies like ours, Taylor Farms, others, okay, that are in this business, it won't be widely available. It will be for the few. We think it should be for the masses, okay? And clearly consumers are very clear. They want it to be for them. And when it's at the right price and is readily available, most consumers actually want that in the berry category.
Vic, any thoughts?
Well, these gentlemen know, the market side going to the consumer very well. And we're kind of 1 and 2 steps removed from that. We have seen that growth, and reference Earthbound primarily. We had just started farming organically because they were looking for more producers, and so we dived in, and it grew, and our operations grew with them. The thing that strikes me is that we still grow a lot of conventional vegetables. We all, we're in the produce business. To me, it's a matter of choice, and they're offering choice, and it's my job for me to create value for my customers, to offer that choice. And I think you're right. What I saw in organic, and to speak to scale, I'd share a quick story, because I went to the Asilomar conference over in Pacific Grove the first year we started growing organic. And I went with my general manager from Yuma, Arizona, and we walked through the lobby as we registered many years ago in the early 90s. And I thought I'd network, and I thought I'm bound to know some people in here. Didn't know anybody. The thing was, the learning curve was the very small farmers, and they're trying to, and you were selling a lifestyle, you were selling different things. Now, we were conventional farmers and growing at that time. We were being tasked to do more and more organic production. What I found was us kind of, meeting and sharing the best of both worlds, but bringing the professionalism and, just the technology, better irrigation systems, better working of the soil to a certain degree in a more efficient manner. It came from the conventional side. What we learned on the organic side was, Jesus, it was beautiful to see seeds pop out of the ground immediately without having to come through an herbicide. We later learned that there's a downside to that, and that's, 10 times more weeds actually popped up too. But, there was a lot of good things that came in, and fertility practices and things that taught us we're putting a lot more fertilizer in the ground than I think we need, because we were growing head lettuce using, 140 units or 200 units of nitrogen for conventional, and we're over there spoon feeding this stuff in organic, not getting the full size, but pretty close, at about 80 units. And you go, wait a minute, do we need to use that much? So I think, it was a good perspective for us to understand what we were doing and how successful we were over here versus here, and how we could complement each other.
That's interesting. So going into organic affords the opportunity to learn on the conventional side and get better, right?
It did for us.
And so I'm curious what you all think about the degree to which that has happened. Has conventional production, not just among the larger scale players, but smaller players as well, has conventional production, and I'll air quote this, improved based on learnings from organic production?
I'd say absolutely.
I agree.
Yeah, and that, at first I think was driven in Europe, and in Europe kind of the difference is very small now, what I understand, between organic and conventional. And so, just respect for the soil, and just like you said, the different tools you use and the way you go about it, I think is helped the conventional folks, and as you say, the rigor of the conventional has helped the organic side, I think, to do well as well.
Yeah, I think we see that our best organic growers are our best growers, period. Because it's, you don't have all the tools, okay, so you gotta think a little bit more about what you're doing. You really gotta pay attention, and that just makes them better growers. And so, yeah, for sure, they take that back to their conventional practices. And so you see a lot more blending, and we're not as far along as Europe is, where it's so close together, okay, but you can see that it's sort of narrowing, okay, and some of that is going to be regulation, where the conventional is getting harder and harder on the regulatory side, and some of it is just the practices are getting more and more similar. And in some of our crops, like I was saying, raspberries and blackberries, there's almost no difference. You can get the same productivity, the same quality. Strawberries is a completely different story. It's the penalty is quite significant in strawberries, but I would say in the other three berries, it could be very similar.
So you mentioned the penalty with strawberries. Another thing I'm curious about here, because you've all talked in a different way about the advantages of scale, and that begs the question, for organic producers, is it still possible to be an organic producer at small scale long-term in a place like California, where costs of operating are so high? How does a smaller size organic producer stay with this business when California especially, and other states and federal regulations add to this, but California makes it really hard if you don't have scale?
Yeah, obviously I would like to think that it's possible, right? We like to think that the small producer can thrive in this industry in our state. The challenge is that every regulation, whether it's a food safety regulation or a labor regulation, every regulation is difficult for a company to deal with, and the small companies have a more difficult time. And so, government is trying to help the small farmer, they're trying to help the small producer, and every time they add a regulation, they make it more difficult for that small producer to be successful, and make it easier for a big producer to compete relative to the small producer. It goes all the way across the board from labor policy, tax policy, all the different policies that people, legislators think they're doing things that are helpful, but all they're doing is adding steps that people have to follow that become more difficult to follow over time. And so that's the challenge, is that people, legislators who think they're trying to be helpful are actually making it very difficult, I think, for the small producer.
Talk a little bit about the notion of sustainability, and I say the notion because I think sustainability is often in the eyes of the beholder. And so I'm really interested in what you see in the marketplace and what you see from different regulatory bodies. Soren, you mentioned the Europeans, and they have a very distinct view of sustainability. Where do you see sustainability affecting the organic sector as it relates to the larger production landscape? And where do you see it going as sustainability continues to evolve and maybe take greater definition depending on which venue you're talking about?
Yeah, I think you have, see how on one end you have sort of the regulatory side, okay, that you have to keep an eye on, where I think, sitting right here in Salinas, okay, we got a lot of issues going on with water right now, and nitrates in water and those things, okay, that is not any easier in organic than it is in conventional. If arguably it's harder, okay. So I think that's an example of where there's a clear set of expectation that's being created, okay, and they're not, it's not that difficult to argue with, or it is difficult to argue with, okay, but yet it's going to make it harder on the organic side. So I think that is an element of sustainability that we definitely have to look at. In our case, technology becomes critical to that. I think we can, in some of the berry crops, do more to capture the water and clean it up and things like that. That would be way harder to do in some of the vegetable crops. Then there's on the consumer side, and I think there's a few sort of disconnects, okay. Plastic packaging in our example would be probably the biggest one, right? We put a lot of plastic clamshells out there, and there's sort of a disconnect between the plastic clamshell and an organic product. And we have an obligation to figure out how to solve that. And which is not we would have solved it if it was easy, okay, so I think that's another example. And then I think it's very clear with consumers globally, there are technologies like GMOs and gene editing I don't think in the consumer's mind that has any chance, okay, with organics. Okay, I just don't see that the consumers are ready in this generation, that will take a long time. It may not be gone forever, but this generation is not going to be ready to accept a product that is.
Do you think they should be?
Well, I think there's certainly part of this potential solution, I think particularly around gene editing, but it's just a no-go with consumers, and if it's no-go, then you can't do it, okay? Certainly not if you're a brand, you can't do it. And so for us, that's just a no-go, even though it probably is part of the solution. But you can't try to sell something consumers don't want, right? Or slip it underneath, that's just not gonna work. So I think that's part of the challenges that we have, that the consumers have very strong opinions, a lot of times about something that they don't know all that much about, but in the end, that doesn't really matter.
So you try and stay ahead of consumers' preferences, probably through a lot of research. You do, I'm sure, a ton of consumer research. But then how do you anticipate where governments will go in laying down sustainability mandates? You mentioned packaging, clamshells, for example. And Bruce, I want to ask you about this too, because the whole subject of single-use plastics has gotten quite hot in California and probably will spread from there.
Well, I think something like plastic clamshells, we have no choice but to get all these clamshells back. So how come that most of the plastic bottles come back and then get used to make our clamshells in the berry industry? That is exactly what's happening. So we are already more than 75% recycled plastics with the clamshell we use. But the plastics, the raw material, are the plastic bottles. And that's because the clamshells themselves don't come back. And so we led together with one of our competitors very recently, okay, just this fall, an initiative to try to get the whole berry industry to go to recycle-ready clamshells, which requires us to change all the labels to a different label. I mean, literally, in a couple of weeks, we got the entire berry industry, not only in California, but in Mexico, in Peru, in Chile, to sign up to switch all the labels. And so now we need to create the right system so these clamshells come back. January 1st, we are making it mandatory for all our suppliers to have a minimum content of recycled thermoform, white flake, from the thermoform. If we take that percentage up, we can be out ahead of the regulators, okay? But we can't not do it, because then we're going to get regulated, and we can never get regulated with something that's not practical. And so I think we have an opportunity here, certainly in our industry, to be ahead of it, and then lead the regulators to a solution that's going to work for everybody. But if we don't do anything, then we kind of deserve to get regulated in this one. We cannot throw, in our case, almost 2 billion clamshells a year in the landfill. That's just not an option.
Your thoughts, Bruce?
I guess starting back to your question about sustainability, from our perspective, it's good business. Many people look at it and see it as a hurdle or as an impediment to running your business. That's not the case. I mean, the more sustainable you design your business, the better your business is operating. The people that are doing the best are doing it the most efficiently, and that means you're not wasting energy or labor or whatever else it might be. And so the notion of sustainability, I think, is a very powerful one for every company to adopt and embrace. In the marketplace, I think consumers, especially millennials, care about where their food comes from. And they have the time to, while they're sitting on your clock, I think, at the desk, looking through social media to find out where their food comes from. And so I think companies, the more open companies can be in terms of what they do and where they do it and how they do it, I think the more readily they'll be embraced by the millennial consumer. So I think that's good business. I would say, and there's probably a couple of retailers on the video here, but so far it's funny where you hear about sustainability from a retail and a buyer perspective all along the year, then it comes time for the price negotiation and never hear about it. And so it's so far, I'm saying so far, it's been a lot of talk and no action. They're not walking the talk. At some point, they'll decide to walk the talk. When there's enough consumer pressure to do that, they'll walk the talk. And then that'll start to change the game a bit. Regarding plastics, the battle is you can't put salad in a paper bag. And so right now, plastic is the solution for us. And the way we see it, obviously, is that it reduces food waste because we're serving 100% usable product. And so you've got this quandary, well, I've got this plastic package or I've got a lot of wasted product. And so which one do I have? And I agree with Soren in that we need to develop a recycling system where it actually comes back. I mean, we make our plastic clamshells in San Juan Bautista for our organic program out of recycled plastic. So the demand is there for the recycled plastic. We just need to get it all back through a recycling system. The Vic Smith recycling program. We'll name it after you.
But you won't pay much for it. Is that what I got from the other?
If I can get paid for it, I'll pay you for it.
I know.
How about that?
I would be happy to lobby with you.
We'll make you a deal. Yeah.
Pay him more so I can have a few pennies.
Well, you anticipated one of my questions.
Did you want to say that again?
For the record, you anticipated one of my questions, which was, you said sustainability is good business.
Yep.
But then the question is, who sets the marker, right? Who sets the goalposts?
Yeah, I mean, McDonald's really, it was interesting. I mean, years ago, they've been working on this for 15, 20 years. And the way they envision it is that it's not necessarily goalposts. It's how'd you do this year in terms of, how'd you do in terms of pounds you produce based on the water you used, in terms of the acreage you used. And what they ask you to do is just get better every year, right? So it's not here, get to 10 of these per something. It's just, show that you're getting better every year, that you're using your land better, so you're getting better yields on your crops, right? So you're using less fertilizer, less pesticide, whatever it is, and it's really a process. It's not just this end goal that is easily defined. I mean, Tim York at Marcon led a PMA process, had to be 15 years ago. Let's define sustainability. We couldn't do it. But it's not this end specific goal. It's the process moving towards getting better and getting more efficient.
But in that relationship with the buyers, with retailers, food service buyers, does organic production have an inside track on sustainability from a marketing standpoint?
Well, sure. From the perspective you're not using chemical fertilizers or pesticides, definitely. I mean, that's kind of the allure of the organic program, right. I think.
I'll jump in on that comment too, because I think, and once again, my focus more on the farming side. We have I consider one of the smartest growers that works within our group, who's very oriented, the demographic type thing we talk about within millennials. She was a generation ahead on them. But, when you talked about sustainability, in some circles that I traveled in, that was a bad word. I'm sick and tired of hearing sustainable. She says, to me, sustainable is about saving money. We're going to use less resources and we're going to save money. So we look at it and say, okay, You know, we have certain trade-offs, but if the example I gave before, we're not spending a ton of money on nitrogen because, you know, we learned that we can actually deliver that to the plant. And I think this consumption, this overconsumption in so many broad categories of sustainability is we had inexpensive oil at the time or something, so, and that made nitrogen, so we could use plenty of nitrogen, didn't matter. Well, we saw that spike up, and that caused us problems. And so as we go through this whole scenario and we're dealt with some limitations by rule under the National Organic Program, it has us thinking about different ways to do things, and it drives us to that solution. I agree with Bruce when it comes to the McDonald's and because, like you say, define sustainability. It's not going to happen in this century, and we still have 80 years left, you know, in my opinion, if you're going to have solid metrics there. The measurement concept is a very good thing. We have to sit down and say, okay, this is our basic inputs, and what can we do to cut back these inputs? Because we're not going to have a silver bullet that says, hey, we just saved 50%. It's an incremental battle in so many ways to say, okay, we cut back use of, well, we use a lot of drip tape, okay. And by far the best production, get the best production by using single-use drip tape. But it's incumbent upon us to go find how we're going to recycle that and turn it back into, so that we're not putting it in landfills, and hopefully we're saving money in that respect. But in every aspect, and we look at tractors and we say, okay, we don't need 400 horsepower tractors if all we're going to do is this one function. It's just overkill. So to me, sustainability, I would put it in the same concept of lean manufacturing concepts, you know. Use what you need and learn how you can use less and less, and you're going to make significant contributions to sustainability.
Do you think that the sustainability tag or label is in any way in competition with the organic label in the marketplace? Is there any consumer confusion about the two?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so either. Okay, I think the consumers have in their mind what organic is, okay, and you know, it has some environmental component to it, but in the minds of the consumers, it has much more of a, so for them, much more of a health component to it. You know, which isn't always a perfect correlation, okay, but that is what they have in their mind. And so, so I don't think there's a sort of a confusion per se, and we don't have as many consumers that inquire about sustainability and what are we doing about this and stuff. You know, I mean, they do on the plastics for sure, okay, we hear about that. But I agree with Vic and Bruce, okay, I sort of think of sustainability as continuous improvement with an eye towards the environment. Is not continuous improvement in the broadest sense, okay, because it has an environmental component. And once you have momentum on an initiative, well, then you can set the end goal, right? Mm-hmm. So we are now doing a lot of work on all the plastics we use in the field. So, you know, drip tape, mulch plastic, fumigation plastic, tunnel plastic. And we got that program up and running. Well, now we have set a goal that by 2023, none of our field plastics end up in landfill. But it was only after we sort of had momentum on the effort. And it sort of made no sense to pick 2023 to begin with, because we probably wouldn't have picked 23, we probably would have picked 25, okay, and it would have taken us 2 years longer, okay, to get there. But we sort of got it going, and we started seeing improvements, and we came up with solutions. Okay, we still got a few challenges, but once it had this momentum, we said, okay, well now when are we going to be done with this, you know? So yeah, I think it's more helpful to think of it as sort of continuous improvement, okay. And then, you know, I think too many companies start out with the end goal in mind, okay, but without a really, you know, sort of any kind of momentum towards that goal.
Yeah. The thing we find is that internally, so we have several plants that are now zero waste. And it didn't happen, you know, from the top down, and we authorized the programs to start with, but it was really embraced by the younger people in the plants, who then ran it through and developed these programs. And so you've got a huge part of your workforce that wants to work in this direction. And so just unleash them, and you'll see good things happen.
Is technology giving you enough advancement to meet those expectations?
Well, I mean, technology in plastic, for example, I mean, I keep telling people there's got to be some kind of microbe we can add to our plastic that eats it after a year, right? So it's not sitting in the landfill or sitting somewhere else it shouldn't be sitting. So there's got to be technology there to help solve that problem, I think. But technology it's helping in all kinds of different ways.
Sure.
Yeah. Sure. But some of it, as Soren says, like, seed development, right? There's huge opportunities in seed development with CRISPR technology, where you're not adding genes for another species, you're taking out a gene, and so it's not GMO. So it's speeding up Mother Nature, and that, if we're able to use that technology, both in conventional and organic, that would be a huge improvements in yields, which again, huge drop in cost, huge improvement in sustainability because you use fewer inputs for more output.
I'd like to jump on that because the gene editing needs to be differentiated from GMO. And I think Monsanto, and I met the chief technology officer, and I said, "You're the guy that screwed up GMO?"
Forever?
And he said, "Yep, that was me." And, didn't frown, didn't laugh. It was just a fact. It was him. So anyway, but it goes to understanding the processes. And I'm going to go two different directions here. Gene editing, first of all, is going to give us the best of what a plant has to offer. And it was interesting to find out that as you're plotting the DNA complexity in plants is far greater than it is in human beings or living animals. They've evolved over time and done so many things. So
Is he speaking for
I look at my lettuce and I said, theoretically, you're smarter than I am. But, you have much more advanced DNA, or it's longer. But anyway.
You're saying the plant has more going for it than you do.
Yes.
Okay.
And
From an evolutionary perspective.
All right, just to be clear.
well, and it talks back to me and it says,
growers,
but I'm a grower, yeah. I talk to it and it signals, back to me. But, okay, so the gene editing is going to be able to select the most positive attributes, and that will eliminate so much waste. It has the potential to eliminate so many of the chemical requirements because you can, reduce, take the strengths that the plant has evolved in and some of the DNA that has affected it, negatively, we can adjust that. So I think if you truly wanted a much better organic world, it would be, in my opinion, and I'm speaking heresy to some organic people out there right now.
I'm backing up right now. The lightning's going to hit you here.
But it is, and it comes with the understanding of what we're doing and where do we want to get to. And I think that's the key. And then it's the educational effort. And I like to, when I look at, I get fascinated with QR codes. Say, you want to know anything about where this product came from, the transparency and how it was produced, and the food safety items, anything you want to know about it, hit that QR code and it will take you to everything that's involved. Can also tell the story, what we're doing about our sustainability and what we're doing, in overall practices, to make this a better planet for, my children and my grandchildren and there's, subsequent generations. So I think that's an important aspect for the organic world. It's an important aspect for our future customers who I definitely see when we talk to people to hire new people, it is no longer about how much you're going to pay me and how fast can I go up. It's about what are you doing? They're literally interviewing us and saying, well, what are you doing about the environment? How do you treat your farm workers? Because I don't want to work for a company, that's exploiting farm workers. And so
they want to work for companies that reflect their values.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important. If there was one, if I were to rate the most predominant factor that would change our behavior as a company, would be the future employees we have to hire. We have to be a better company. We have to do better to get the better people, to get the best people. And so I think that's a big part of the motivation. Yes, retailers can drive it because they perceive consumers are going to drive it, and they will. But immediately, we look at it and say, you know, when I get asked that question, I go, well, I'm sure it's not enough, but what would you recommend? I'm not going to sit there, oh yeah, we do everything. Hell, I don't know.
You make a compelling case for the upsides with CRISPR technology, but Soren said a little while ago, you can't sell something to consumers that they don't want. And so to me, it begs the question, and it's really a question for the organic community as much as anybody, because the technology does offer the promise of getting to that better world that you spoke of, Vic. Mm-hmm. But the technology is still questioned, I think it is the polite way to put it, within the organic sector. And so throw it open to all of you again. Should there be a more concerted effort to present the technology, CRISPR technology, gene editing technology, to get to that better world that you spoke of, or is it a lost cause? Is it already ideologically tainted by its predecessor, by GMO?
Well, I think it is a highly relevant conversation for this year, because here we're in this year where, you know, there's so many people that are questioning good science, okay? And I think, ironically, in this case, a lot of the people that are supporting the good science, you know, on how we're going to combat COVID, okay, are some of the very same people that would argue against the good science behind technologies like gene editing. But you also have a regulatory component with a lot of the genetics that moves globally. The Europeans have already decided from a regulatory standpoint that this is like GMO. The Australians have already decided. So we take our best strawberry varieties, our best raspberry varieties, and we move them all over the world. For us, this is really a massive hindrance, okay, because we would have to run parallel breeding programs, some with gene editing in them, and others without. Okay, and so and certainly in our case, but that would be true for a lot of commodities, the cost of the genetic development just skyrocketed, because you would have to now go and basically customize to all these different geographies around the world, because they haven't been able to get on the same page. The regulators in the European Union can't agree with the Americans, they can't agree with the Australians, they can't agree with the Chinese, and so that's a huge problem. And I think the scientists can't agree, okay, because they can't come up with sort of a unified recommendation. And so that's leaving a lot of holes for consumer advocacy groups, and the ones that that we know will go after an argument like this, okay, and you're just leaving the door wide open, and they're walking right through the door, and it sort of leaves us with, okay, that risk I think is too high, okay. That again, I believe that's definitely true on the more branded side, okay. If you've got a brand attached to it, you're gonna have a lot of people coming and knocking on your door, okay, and that's the question is who wants to deal with that?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, in the potato industry, you probably heard of the innate potato, which they developed up in Idaho, and it's a heirloom variety of potato that they took genes from that and put into a Russell Burbank potato. And it doesn't turn brown, and it's got 1/8 of the cancer-causing impact when you fry it. So it's much healthier for people. So to your question, and McDonald's is afraid to use it, I'm sure, right? So, and yet it would be healthier for their consumers. So at some point, information, maybe with social media, maybe with people that have respect in the social media marketplace, will embrace one or two of these products, topics, and help make it get the right information out there, get trusted information out there.
Soren mentioned a good point. Europeans have already called the shot here. They've already made a decision, and so we have just had an election, and we'll have a new administration coming in, and begs the question from all of you. Do you see a need for organic policy to change at USDA, the National Organic Program, Vic, you mentioned? If so, how? What do you expect in terms of pressure to change it, and how that would affect the industry?
I would say, I think the opportunity is you sort of go back to this idea of continuous improvement with an eye towards the environment, okay? I think we should all embrace that. So how can we make the organic business better, right? As opposed to that we're just doing it all wrong and there needs to be some wholesale change, okay? I think the problem with that would be that you're gonna be able to market to a much narrower group of consumers because you're gonna make the product way more expensive. Okay, and there may be people that are coming in with, they have all the right intentions. Okay, but they do not care about the consumers. They cannot care about the business of organics, and that would be a big mistake. But I think it's okay to challenge all of us in the industry and say, how can we make the whole thing better? And so, I personally look at some of the things that we do where, we got our big organic ranches right next to huge conventional ranches, and there's inherently some problems with that. I think we can't just sort of look at that and go like, well, we never have any drift. We don't have the diseases we have over here. Don't come over here. Yeah, of course they do. Okay, and we know we run into these problems from time to time. So can you create a system where there are opportunities, okay, to have a much bigger systemic approach to how do you do organics really well? Personally, I have this sort of dream, okay, ever since I joined Driscoll's, that the valley was our home valley, okay, over in the Pajaro Valley in Watsonville, is that whole valley one day was all organics. It's not a very big valley. It's not like the Salinas Valley. It's massive. There's a lot of organic production there already, and it actually has some opportunities to put in some practices, okay, where you can have the right places for the bees to live in the hills, because we don't farm the hills because there's no water in the hills, okay, and that there isn't a way to look at the whole approach and saying, okay, well, what could it become? And so, but we can't sort of get there overnight. That's a generational thing. Mm-hmm. But I think pushing towards that is okay, and between government and private business and local communities, I think you can create some ambitious plans for where you want to head. And I think business will be, all in on that. We would be very much in favor of that. And I think then you end up with a better system, okay? But you're not sort of just regulated there. And so I hope the administration comes in with the idea that we're going to have, broader collaboration around this, okay? And what are some of the ideas? And I think we will be inspired to participate in that.
Vic, any thoughts on the organic program through USDA?
From the new administration concept?
Yeah.
Well, the generic thing in my mind is, well, okay, you got a Democratic administration, they're probably going to lean more towards, and I think we saw this in the Obama administration, more towards the purist organic, listening to the loudest voices a bit further away from the mainstream. And so, I would venture to say that probably is going to shift. I think the administration that's currently there, with Trump administration, didn't listen, anywhere near. It certainly didn't listen to the extreme over there. So, but I look at the way the whole Organic Act was set up, and how it exploded, and we have, whether we can change it, I doubt. But should it be changed? Absolutely. I think you could make a case that when that Organic Act went into effect and what was required of it, there was a massive amount of comments on the legislation, and even more comments on, promulgating the rules and implementing it. And that's where an extreme group came in. There was significant complaint about using, any water that had chlorine in it to wash the vegetables. And even the guy from CCOF, which is a very purist type certification, says, my God, the requirement in it is not to exceed what you have in drinking water. Do you want to ban drinking water? It just, there was that confusion within, a limited group there. And so it needs to be looked at. It's very burdensome to try and get something to react so that we can get more organic products available at very reasonable pricing. And it's not set up that way right now. The NOSB, National Organic Standards Board, is extremely challenging to work, but it was a nice concept back in the early 90s amongst a very selective little group of people saying, okay, this is the way we're gonna take care of this. And now, you have this much larger market, and I don't think the way it is, the way it's set up, the legislation nor the rules can anywhere near deal with the demand capability that we have. So, one person's opinion.
I guess I would share a couple thoughts. One, that I would assume the incoming administration will promulgate programs that support smaller growers, right? And organic growers, I would think they're perceived as more sustainable, and I think that aligns with the climate objectives. There will be more regulation. I'm fairly confident that will come, and unfortunately, regulation kind of comes from a "we don't trust you" attitude, right? I mean, otherwise you wouldn't have regulation, and so that creates more difficulty for the organic community, I think. And the thing to keep in mind, I think, is that here, as we kind of build this organic puzzle or edifice, if you will, the coming competition to organic is indoor grown, whether it's greenhouse or vertical farming. And the attraction there is local, right? And so you've got this huge amounts of capital going into building greenhouses around the United States. And there's no organic protocol, right? There's no growing protocol. There's no standards that they need to adhere to. It's just they go to market as local, and the consumer prefers local over organic. And so my caution is, let's not spend a lot of time fighting over here about the details when in the bigger picture, you've got a bigger threat. We've got a bigger threat from indoor growing, I think. And so that's just something to keep our eyes on.
That's an interesting point. You know, and I think you're aware of it, and I became aware because I was asked to kind of join a group that was primarily with the berries about the medium that it's being grown in. And the purists, they say purists, I mean, you know, there's certain segments of the organic world that believe this and this. It's just not one group that believes the same thing. And so, you know, there's pushback in that area. You know, if you're not growing in soil where you have an organic program, you know, an organic service program that says this is how we do our holistic approach to organic, then it shouldn't be certified organic. And so, you know, there's multiple challenges, I agree, with the indoor farming and that type of thing. And then how does that blend, or how can that interact and intersect with organic principles or, you know, other factors? And I don't know. You know, I think that's a topic that could be addressed as its own topic right now, as far as overlaying into the regulatory side. But your point was well taken. It's, you know, if you're too worried over here and the bigger problem's over here.
Well, so I want to follow up on that because Bruce used the word threat, talking about indoor production, vertical farming, et cetera. And it calls to mind for me, you said the local brand is more powerful than organic, and that probably should be teased out a little bit. But I also am curious what you all think about, because I think this intersects, the growing interest among urbanites in agriculture. We have an individual who is hoping to be appointed U.S. Secretary of Agriculture who is from Cleveland. You know,
big farm city.
Yeah, right. But this is not a new thing, right? We've seen a lot of politicians from urban areas now want to get involved in agricultural policy. A lot of them come at it thinking about organic production, about feeding programs, and about sustainability. And so coming back to indoor production, I'm just curious, Soren, I'll go to you on this. Is it a threat? Or is it a niche that can complement our desire to increase consumption of fresh produce?
Well, we obviously look at it as an opportunity because we have put some money into it, okay, and so we recently announced that we are doing a partnership with Plenty, the indoor farming company out of South San Francisco. And so, but Bruce brings up a really, really important point, which is when you look at the economics of indoor farming, you have these drivers, just like you have when you're farming outdoors, okay, the drivers of the economics. And so obviously transportation is a big factor, right? So in leafy greens, okay, you know, sometimes the freight is more than the leafy greens. But if you eliminate the freight, okay, we got that money to save. So in our case, and we've really shined a light on this during the pandemic, is our largest export market is the Middle East. So, but when all the passenger planes stopped flying, we had to go on charter, which now we have a weekly charter from California to Dubai full of berries, okay? Don't want to tell you how much it costs, okay, but it's still a viable business.
I'd like a seat on that plane.
You can get a seat, okay? Put you in the co-pilot seat.
That'd be a great breakfast all the way across the world.
So, but the cost of that air freight is now money we can put in our pocket to go and build an indoor farm in Dubai, right? So that, of course, is a major driver. The point that Bruce is bringing up is that if you're introducing other drivers that go against the cost of growing, let's say, organics, so more regulations, more things you can't do, okay? You have now another driver in favor of the indoor farming, right? Because they don't have that driver. So we know, and this is where the consumer insight is so critical, the two things that make consumers really buy organics is the fundamental thing is pesticide free, okay, and therefore safer and healthier. Not obviously totally true, okay, but that's what they think. And then they actually think that organics tends to be more local. I have some of that allure of locally grown, okay. Well, indoor farming addresses both those issues because it will be it'll be super local, right? You can stick the farm right where next to where all the people are. And in our case, in the berries, is you would do it somewhere where you can't grow berries, like Dubai, like Shanghai, like New York, and you don't use any pesticides inside. So the very thing that makes organics such an attractive business, the indoor farming actually addresses. Can the indoor farming overcome all economic drivers? Okay, that's still a question mark. Okay, that's still where there's some work to be done on the research. But if you look far enough out, oil or transportation is definitely going to be more expensive, not less expensive, right? So that's a major driver in the agriculture industry today. And labor is, the last 10 years has probably increased at twice the rate of inflation, certainly here in California it has. And with the indoor farming, you need a lot less labor. And if robotics is ever going to work in the berry harvest, okay, it's going to work in indoor farming where the plant comes to the robot. And so you can begin to see how the underlying drivers of why indoor farming becomes viable are already there, and they're already on some kind of track. Now, it won't be some straight line. It'll be, like that, okay, but it's heading in the right direction. Are we out too far ahead of the curve, or, are we right on the curve? Okay, well, time will tell. But I think that is, when you look at the organics business as a business, okay, it is right to describe it as a threat. Okay, and the question is, are we as an industry piling on, okay, and making the indoor farming even more viable as an alternative to organics? Okay, are we supporting the organics and making it stronger, and therefore we'll be able to hold off the indoor farming? That to me is a fundamental question that people that are listening today should think long and hard about that.
Could I jump in on that thought, because it led me to a little tangent out here, and I talk about a dated legislation and rulemaking, and I think they buried the NOP group, National Organic Program Administrator, somewhere in the bowels of the USDA building down there, and so they don't get a lot of respect, and so they listen to a very smaller group. But it comes to, if we define organic and we go too narrowly, then we're going to have to shift in a different direction, because I look at, if you take gene editing out of the equation, I like the organic business. I mean, we're a significant producer of it, and we're giving a consumer, something they want, and they're paying for it. So that's great. But if I look for the future down the road, and it takes us into indoor farming, and that's part of the drivers that will change the economic equation. I get that part, but it's not what organic was originally started out with, So there was a big pushback on, what kind of containers if you were growing and you can claim it organic, was it, people said, no, that's not soil, that's not organic. You don't have an organic service plan that says how you're going to maintain this environment and, improve it. So it kind of drives us away from organic. And now we're getting into so many options out there. And I look at the indoor farming and I say, okay, I look at it and say, obviously it takes investment capital. And, it takes private equity funds and venture capital funds to go develop new ideas. And I look at that, and I'm biased because I do a lot of growing, in Western soils. And I look at that and I just can't see in the next 20 years how they're going to beat the efficiency factor that we have, and even transporting it, and if you brought electric trucks transporting versus, and I see that trend happening a lot quicker, and delivering to bigger marketplaces, I think that takes away, that's a driver that takes, you're always got a plus or minus, This is a plus for indoor, this one isn't. So the scale is always jumping up and back and down, and ultimately it has a place, but when you try and blend one type of operation, what amazes me is so many people are indoor farming with leafy greens. That is the easiest thing in the world to grow. Okay?
Don't tell people that. What are you thinking?
You got to get paid less.
But
There goes my penny more. Yeah.
Well, wait a minute. But you can't get paid any money for it. I mean, when you talked about the 18, I was there when they were selling those 3 pound for $18. And I'm still there when it's being sold for $3. And it was a marginal business then, and it's still a marginal business. And so, and we could talk about so much consumer attitudes, and it's great, and those type of things, but we're not going to change overnight, or it's going to take a considerable change in consumer attitudes to pay significantly more money for something, that is in that range.
Dave, I think I'm going to push back on Vic a little bit, okay, because I think there's two things that completely changes that equation, okay, and I think this is a good year to be talking about that is something happens, okay, something bad happens, okay, that has happened in the leafy greens industry, right? I mean, your customer finally says, okay, that's enough, okay, this was the last recall, I'm not doing another one, right? I'm just going with these guys because I just don't want to deal with it. So you have that kind of event, right? And that can happen to any one of the commodities, right? So you have some dramatic event, and this is in our industry is not some white swan, okay? That is sort of a that could happen, or you have a tipping point on one of these drivers where it just becomes, we were almost at $150 a barrel on the oil, okay? This whole thing made a lot more sense when you were at 150, but we seem to just have forgotten that it was 150 and now it's whatever 50. But if it's 300, the equation is completely different. And I think that's what I would just encourage people to do is think about those things, right? And so for us, we're not thinking about it as an insurance policy, okay? But we are saying, okay, are these things, is it likely to happen? Is it plausible? And we go, yes, very much so.
And I would tend to agree with you when I sink my first 10 million in a facility growing it. Right now I haven't done that, so I don't agree with you.
I mean, to me, any group or man or woman that wants to grow fresh fruits and vegetables and promote it is good for the industry. It gets the consumer thinking about it, talking about it, and we can all benefit from higher consumption. My personal opinion on the indoor growing is that there will be a great deal of money that is lost from the investment perspective. I also think it'll be a significant part of the industry down the road. So a little bit of both. I think way too much money flowing in right now. Really I think the selling points right now, one are that there's going to be 9 billion people in the world, and so we're short of food. Well, we can all manage to grow too much food today and next year and the following year. So that's not true.
A threat.
That's not true. And the second is essentially assured supply. So when COVID hit, store shelves were empty for a week or two. And people say, gosh, if you've been indoor growing, the store shelves would have been full. Well, that's not true, because the store shelves were empty, one, because consumers were buying 30% more. And the indoor growing can't turn up their production 30% in a day, and just as we can't turn 30% in a day. So they wouldn't have filled the shelves anyway. And secondly, it was really a distribution bottleneck at the retailer. There was enough product in the pipeline, they couldn't get it through their physical warehouses. Same problem would have confronted the indoor growing as well. And so those are really the two selling points to these very smart investors on the East Coast who are pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into this space that it'll be interesting to see what comes of that.
We're going to wrap up here, but I want to ask you we'll do a lightning round. Think, as I know you all do, 10, 15, 20 years down the road here in the organic space. Are you bullish? Are you a bear? Or are you somewhere in between? Vic?
I'm bullish. Of course, I'm probably not all there mentally because I'm a farmer, but and you got to be optimistic.
And the vegetable smarter, you said.
Well, the plants are proven. I should have never said that. But anyway, I'm bullish on organic, but I expect that we're going to have to get better and better as producers of organic. I think we're going to have to be very nimble and react to consumer expectations while we still have to put up with the lagging regulatory. Regulations come out a year after you need them, and they what California recently did with ag labor was insane, but it's definitely after the fact. But we have to put up with that, and we have to be able to work hard to bring good, safe, we have to protect our consumers, our workers, our employees, and the environment. And, we just have to be able to regulate in a more positive and an intelligent manner. But I think that general concept is that people want to eat healthier food. I think the perception is that organic would be healthier when there's no evidence to that. But if I feel comfortable, my daughter buys organic milk for her children. Now, I don't care, you can show her all the science in the world, don't matter. I'm buying organic milk, I'm buying organic spinach and organic broccoli for my children. So if that's the case, then we want to fill that need and we want to be able to produce it. My job is to be able to produce it at a price where it goes through the system and, these gentlemen can make money and the consumer can still afford to pay for it. And I think we can do that. It's amazing what we've done. I know what I've done since 1993, I think it was, starting in organics and leafy greens. And it's amazing what we're doing and what little inflation there is. We did it because we got smarter, we invoked technology, we learned a lot more. And so I'm very bullish on it.
Soren, bull or bear?
Yeah, I'm definitely bullish. Okay, I think this is where consumers want to go, and it's always good advice to follow the consumer. Okay, if you want to be in business. Okay, and so, but things will evolve a lot in the next 15, 20 years for sure, and technology will be a major driver.
Since Bruce is kind enough to host us, you have the final word. Bull or bear?
How about cautiously optimistic?
That'll work.
As Vic said, I see it in my grandkids' refrigerator, and so if you look at half the country that's the youngest half the population, they're consuming more organic product than the older half. So they'll continue to grow. The older half will obviously fade away. So the marketplace will continue to grow. A couple of things I would say that, and the reason I'm cautiously optimistic, is we introduced a line of chopped salads, which are conventional chopped salads. And what we saw is that the chopped salads took off because it was a great flavor, great experience, and the organic sales flattened. So even the organic consumer will go to something new and something that tastes great. Indoor growing, same potential problem, or same potential issue. Plenty that you mentioned has some varieties of arugula and kale and things like that that taste really good. And so to the extent the organic industry can produce a product that tastes great, they'll thrive, we'll thrive together, but we are threatened by others that are pushing the taste envelope and the quality characteristics. And so I'm optimistic, cautiously.
Fascinating conversation. All three of you are extremely busy people, so really appreciate the time that you spent to sit down and share some of your wisdom and some of your thoughts.
Thanks, Dave.
It's been a
pleasure.
It's been a really good conversation.
Good job,
Thank you.
Dave.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thanks, Soren. Thanks,
All right.
Vic.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
We hope you enjoyed today's Organic Grower Summit 2020 Roundtable. And a special thank you to our sponsors, Semios, Nature Safe, International Paper, IFCO, and BioFlora. Be safe, and we look forward to seeing you in 2021.